Hello, everybody. Welcome back to week 5 of our lunchtime lives. I hope you've all been enjoying them so far. I've been really enjoying doing them. We've got some other members of the team that are going to join in as well, so it won't always be, but it's been a good start to the new year, hasn't it? Being able to kind of immerse ourselves into the world of Charles Dickens. I'm really excited about this week because this week I'm reading from what I think is genuinely my favorite Charles Dickens novel, Great Expectations. It is, of course, one of the top 5, as it were, of all of his stories. But what I particularly like about this story and the extract I'm about to read for you is that it really gives us, I think, an insight into Dickens's own mind when he wrote this book. 1860 is the year that Great Expectations is published, and it comes out really at quite a turbulent time in Dickens's life. Just 2 years earlier, in 1858, he and his wife Catherine had decided to separate. This was a real scandal in Victorian society. It damaged his reputation. There was huge amounts of gossip put about at the time, newspaper articles accusing Dickens of being a hypocrite, of accusing him of having illegitimate children. That was completely false, but the accusation itself was damaging. And so Dickens was really wrestling with protecting his reputation, perhaps with a sense of guilt that maybe he wasn't living up to his own expectations, his own sort of code of ethics, as it were, or sense of what he should be and who he should be. And also dealing with quite complicated issues, thinking about how people are going to think of him, how people are going to remember him. It was perhaps the first time in his career that people weren't just saying what a genius he was, they were saying quite bad things about him. And it's in that year, 1860, he decides famously to have a big bonfire in his garden and burn all of the letters that he has, letters that he's written, letters from people that have written to him. And it was while he was kind of having this sort of sense of fear about being misremembered after death that he was writing at the same time Great Expectations. And so the scene that I'm about to read for you, I think is wonderful because it's very dramatic, it's very exciting. Little Pip, or he's an adult by this point, but Pip is being attacked by Orlick on the marshlands. It's a very sort of evocative, descriptive, very dramatic piece. But it's also a piece in which Dickens, through the eyes of Pip, kind of tackles this question of how do you deal with the fact that you can be misremembered after you've died. So for me, it's one of my favorite scenes. So I'm going to start reading it for you. It's also just very dramatic and, everyone loves a bit of drama. So here we go. Great Expectations. It was a dark night, though the full moon rose as I left the enclosed lands and passed out upon the marshes. Beyond their dark line, there was a ribbon of clear sky, hardly broad enough to hold the large red moon. In a few minutes she had ascended out of that clear field, in among the piled mountains of cloud. There was a melancholy wind, and the marshes were very dismal. A stranger would have found them insupportable, and even to me they were so oppressive that I hesitated, half inclined to go back. But I knew them well, and could have found my way on a far darker night, and had no excuse for returning, being there. So, having come against my inclination, I went on against it. The direction that I took was not that in which my old home lay, nor that in which we had pursued the convicts. My back was turned towards the distant hulks as I walked on, and though I could see the old lights away on the spits of sand, I saw them over my shoulder. I knew that the lime kiln was as well as I knew the old battery, but they were miles apart, so that if a light had been burning at each point of the night, there would be a long strip of blank horizon between the two bright specks. At first, I had to shut some gates after me, and now and then to stand while the cattle that were lying on the banked-up pathway arose and blundered down among the grass and reeds. But after a little while, I seemed to have the whole flats to myself. It was another half hour before I drew near the kiln. The lime was burning with a sluggish, stifling smell, but the fires were made up and left, and no workmen were visible. Hard by was a small stone quarry. It lay directly in my way, and had been worked that day, as I saw by the tools and barrows that were lying about. Coming up again to the marsh level, out of this excavation, for the rude path lay through it, I saw a light in the old sluice house. I quickened my pace and knocked at the door with my hand. Waiting for some reply, I looked about me, noticing how the sluice was abandoned and broken, and how the house, of wood with a tiled roof, would not be proof against the weather much longer, if it were so even now, and how the mud and ooze were coated with lime, and how the choking vapour of the kiln crept in a ghostly way towards me. Still there was no answer, and I knocked again. No answer still, and I tried the latch. It rose under my hand, and the door yielded. Looking in, I saw a lighted candle on a table, a bench, and a mattress on a truckle bedstead. As there was a loft above, I called, "Is anyone here?" But no voice answered. Then I looked at my watch, and finding that it was past 9, called again, "Is there anyone here?" There being still no answer, I went out the door, irresolute what to do. It was beginning to rain fast. Seeing nothing save what I had seen already, I turned back into the house and stood just within the shelter of the doorway, looking out into the night. While I was considering that someone must have been there lately and must soon be coming back, or the candle would not be burning, it came into my head to look if the wick were long. I turned round to do so, and had taken up the candle in my hand when it was extinguished by some violent shock. The next thing I comprehended was that I had been caught in a strong running noose, thrown over my head from behind. "Now," said a suppressed voice with an oath, "I've got you." "What is this?" I cried, struggling. "Who is it? Help! Help! Help!" Not only were my arms pulled close to my sides, but the pressure on my bad arm caused me exquisite pain. Sometimes a strong man's hand, sometimes a strong man's breast was set against my mouth to deaden my cries, and with a hot breath always close to me, I struggled ineffectually in the dark while I was fastened tight to the wall. "And now," said the suppressed voice with another oath, "call out again, and I'll make short work of you." Faint and sick, with the pain of my injured arm, bewildered by the surprise, and yet conscious how easily this threat could be put in execution, I desisted, and tried to ease my arm were it ever so little. But it was bound too tight for that. I felt as if, having been burnt before, it were now being boiled. The sudden exclusion of the night and the substitution of black darkness in its place warned me that the man had closed a shutter. Groping about for a little, the flint and steel he wanted, and began to strike a light. I strained my sight upon the sparks that fell among the tinder, and upon which he breathed and breathed, match in hand, but I could see only his lips and the blue point of the match, even those but fitfully. The tinder was damp, no wonder there, and one after another the sparks died out. The man was in no hurry, and struck again with the flint and steel. As the sparks fell thick and bright about him, I could see his hands, the touches of his face, and could make out that he was seated and bending over the table, but nothing more. Presently I saw his blue lips again, breathing on the tinder, and then a flare of light flashed up and showed me Orlick. Whom I had looked for, I don't know. I had not looked for him. Seeing him, I felt that I was in a dangerous strait indeed, and I kept my eyes upon him. He lighted the candle from a flaring match with great deliberation, and dropped the match and trod it out. Then he put the candle away from him on the table so that he could see me, and sat with his arms folded on the table and looked at me. I made out that I was fastened to a stout perpendicular ladder a few inches above the wall, a fixture there, the means of ascent to the loft above. "Now," said he, when he had surveyed one another for some time, "I've got you. Unbind me, let me go." "Ah," he returned, "I'll let you go. I'll let you go to the moon, I'll let you go to the stars, all in good time." "Why have you lured me here? Don't you know?" said he, with a deadly look. "Why have you set upon me in the dark?" "Because I mean to do it all myself. One keeps a secret better than two. Oh, you enemy, you enemy." His enjoyment of the spectacle I furnished, as he sat with his arms folded on the table, shaking his head at me and hugging himself, had a malignity in it that made me tremble. As I watched him in silence, he put his hand into the corner at his side and took up a gun with a brass-bound stock. "Do you know this?" he said, making as if he would aim at me. "Do you know where you saw it before? Speak, Wolf." "Yes," I answered. "You cost me that place, you did. Speak." "What else could I do?" "You did that, and that would be enough without more. How dared you come betwixt me and a young woman I liked?" "When did I?" "When didn't you? It was as you always gave old Orlick a bad name to her." "You gave it to yourself. You gained it for yourself. I could have done you no harm if you had done yourself none." "You're a liar, and you'll take any pains and spend any money to drive me out the country, will you?" said he, repeating my words to Biddy in the last interview I had with her. "Now, I'll tell you a piece of information. It was never so well worth your while to get me out this country as it is tonight. Oh, if it was all your money 20 times told to the last brass farden," as he shook his heavy hand at me, with his mouth snarling like a tiger's, I felt that it was true. "What are you going to do to me?" "I'm a-going," said he, bringing down his fist upon the table with a heavy blow and rising as the blow fell to give it greater force. "I'm a-going to have your life." He leaned forward, staring at me, slowly unclenched his hand and drew it across his mouth as if his mouth watered for me, and sat down again. "You was always in old Orlick's way ever since you was a child. You goes out of this way this present night. He'll have no more on you. You're dead." I felt that I had come to the brink of my grave. For a moment I looked wildly round my trap for any chance of escape, but there was none. "More than that," said he, folding his arms on the table again, "I won't have a rag of you. I won't have a bone of you left on earth. I'll put your body in the kiln. I'll carry 2 such to it on my shoulders, and let people suppose what they may of you. They shall never know nothing." My mind, with inconceivable rapidity, followed out all the consequences of such a death. Estella's father would believe I had deserted him, would be taken, would die accusing me. Even Herbert would doubt me when he compared the letter I had left for him with the fact that I had called at Miss Havisham's gate for only a moment. Joe and Biddy would never know how sorry I had been that night. None would ever know how I had suffered, how true I had meant to be, what an agony I had passed through. The death close before me was terrible, but was the dread of being misremembered after death. And so quick were my thoughts that I saw myself despised by unborn generations, Estella's children and their children, while the wretch's words were yet on his lips. "Now, Wolf," said he, "before I kill you like any other beast, which is what I mean to do to you and what I've tied you up for, I'll have a good look at you and a good goad at you, oh you enemy." It had passed through my thoughts to cry out for help again, though few could know better than I the solitary nature of the spot and the hopelessness of aid. But as he sat gloating over me, I was supported by a scornful detestation of him that sealed my lips. Above all things, I resolved that I would not entreat him, and that I would die making some last poor resistance to him. Softened as my thoughts of all the rest of men were in that dire extremity, humbly beseeching pardon as I did of heaven, melted at my heart as I was by the thought that I had taken no farewell, and never now could take farewell, of those who were dear to me, or could explain myself to them, or ask for their compassion on my miserable errors. Still, if I could have killed him, even in dying, I would have done it. There you go. That is a scene from Great Expectations, one of my favourites. But I really love that bit where Pip, it's like his life is flashing before his eyes. And one of the big fears that he has is, what if people don't remember the person who I actually am? That line of, no one would know how good I had intended to be. I think it's really reflective, and given where Dickens was at this point in his life in 1860, I think it's this wonderful little mirror into how Dickens himself was feeling about how he would be remembered to history. I hope you enjoyed this week's Lunchtime Live. And remember, we will be back next Monday at midday. See you then.